There are millions of podcasts and there are millions of YouTube channels, but have you ever thought of combining the two to have a video podcast? Today we're going to talk about the benefits of incorporating both video and podcasting together. Let's dive right into it. If you're new here, my name is Liz. I help coaches and consultants add video to their business. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss any of my future content. Now, I'm a person who has a podcast and I have a YouTube channel, but I have not yet combined the two. The reason that I haven't done that is because the purpose of this YouTube channel is to help you add video to your business. That's the topic of this channel. On the other hand, my podcast is on a different topic. My podcast is more about how to start and run a thriving coaching business because I serve as a video coach myself. So that's a little bit of a different topic. It doesn't have to do with video marketing. So for this reason, I've chosen not to combine the two. But I absolutely could. So I'm going to give you some tips and some pointers for how to get started if you want to do something like that, why you would want to combine them, and why you may choose not to. Let's dive right into it. Now, the main reason you may not want to have a video podcast is if you feel like it would be too much work to be running a YouTube channel on this topic in addition to a YouTube channel about another topic. So let me clarify what I'm talking about there, because that's exactly the situation I'm in. I already had this existing YouTube channel that you're watching this video on. So I started this YouTube channel when I first started my business, and I mainly talk about video marketing here and how to add video to your business. That is the aim and the goal of this channel, and the audience that watches it are typically interested in that. My podcast, on the other hand, is for new coaches, people who are just getting started with the coaching industry, to teach them how to get started and all of the different things that they need to know. So that's a different audience from the people that watch this account, which means in order to have a video podcast, I would have to start another YouTube channel purely so that I could have a video podcast for that podcast topic. I just don't want to be managing two YouTube channels. That is really the only reason that I've never dove into the world of video podcasting myself. However, many people that I work with have video podcasts, and I follow many video podcasts. So there are absolutely advantages to having this. So let me dive into some of those. Now, the first advantage is that you can get your podcast and your video done at the same time. That's a huge advantage. You don't have to spend extra time to do these things. So basically the way that a video podcast works is that you would sit down and get ready to do your normal podcast. You're going to record your normal podcast, but you are simply going to set up a video camera to record you while you are doing that. That is really all it is. There's nothing more to it than that. Of course, the way that you record it and all of the effects and the editing, that can all differ, but in general, this is what the principle is. So that means you don't have to record your podcast episode one day and then shoot a separate video for it another day. It doesn't work like that because they both need to be happening at the same time. That's why it's a video podcast. So that means you turn on your microphone for your podcast, you turn on your recording device for your video, and then you run everything at the same time. You've got the footage from both. Now, after you do that, of course, you are going to have to do some editing. Some work is involved there because if you are recording your podcast, you might have some errors that you made halfway through, or you might need to pause and take a break or say something one more time. That always happens when you are recording a podcast. So what are you going to do with that footage on video? You obviously don't want those moments to be captured. So alongside editing this podcast, you would have to edit that video so that it just aligns nicely. But that's basically the whole premise behind how you get this done. Now, the main advantage of doing this is that you can now show up in two different platforms without having to create two different pieces of content. In my case, I create one piece of content for my podcast on one topic, and then I'm creating different content for my video, for my YouTube channel. But if you're doing the video podcast, it's all the same one piece of content. It's only extra effort to do that editing. So imagine if you can create one piece of content and you are building your audience on iTunes, on Spotify, on Stitcher, and all of the podcasting apps. And at the same time, you're building another audience on YouTube. Because remember, some people love consuming content via your podcast. Those people are going to just tune in, plug in their earphones and tune into the podcast version. Others who are not big fan of podcasts, but they like watching YouTube channels, they're going to get that same content by tuning into your YouTube channel. So you can simultaneously grow audiences in both places. I've seen some of my clients in the past start with a video podcast purely so that they could understand whether their audience is actually more of a podcast consumer or a YouTube consumer. Then from watching the data over a period of 6 to 7 months, they make a decision if they want to go all in with the podcast or all in with the YouTube. That's another really great way to do it. Now we're interrupting this video so that I can remind you to subscribe. I think you should do that first. And if you are interested in moving along with your video journey sooner rather than later, then I invite you to join me on my next live free webinar where I'm going to be going over 3 key things that you can start doing this week to get moving with video. Be sure to look for it in the description below and I will send you all the details. Now let's get back to our video. Now remember, all of the usual rules about creating content for a YouTube channel and creating content for a podcast, all of those rules still apply. You're still basically doing all of that work, but now you're doing it for 2 mediums, which is not that different from what I do because I'm already doing it for my podcast and I'm doing it for my YouTube channel as well. So the work is still there, but you are now aligning that work so that it's on the same topic every single week or however often you do that content. Now, for example, let's say that I'm going to have a video podcast episode on the topic of how to create a video marketing strategy for yourself. That's going to be the topic of my podcast and the video that I'm shooting at the same time. Now consider, I have to create that content that I'm going to say in that podcast, so I have to do that. Then I have to record it, and at the same time, I have to shoot that video. Then I have to edit it. So when I'm editing it, I'm taking out any errors, anything that I missed or did twice. I'm doing the same on the video because I want to cut out those portions. Then I'm creating the podcast art for the podcast episode. Simultaneously, I can create the thumbnail for the YouTube channel. I'm going to create the description for that episode of the podcast, and I might use that same description for the YouTube. There might be some links under those podcast show notes, so I can use some of those links for the YouTube episode. So like this, you are very, very closely aligning everything about that episode. But if you feel like the audience that's watching that YouTube episode, that there's a little bit more you can give them in the description, then you can add that. Similarly, you can do the same for the podcast if you feel like there's another podcast episode you want to link there for that audience. And at the end of that YouTube channel, you can put up one of the end screens prompting that viewer to watch another video podcast. On a podcast itself, you can't do that as easily. You can't put anything on the screen since there's no screen. Instead, you can just tell the listener that they can check out another podcast episode number, whatever. So in many ways, both of these actions are very, very closely aligned. But some of the differences come with your use of the tools and the editing. So let's talk for a minute about the actual recording and the editing. If you have 2 recording devices, for example, a DSLR as well as a smartphone, or 2 smartphones even, you can set up one so that it's forward facing like how I have right now, and you could even set up another one here on the side so that it's capturing some side shots. That way you can mix and match between forward facing and side shots for the people who are going to be watching the YouTube version. That's always an interesting way to just keep your viewers engaged. And it has no bearing on what's happening on the meantime with the podcast. For the actual recording of your voice, don't forget that you need a proper microphone for that. You would be getting all of that together just when you decide to create a podcast anyway. There's so many different mic suggestions. Be sure to look in the description below for some. But remember, whichever mic you choose, that will